The party that most people in the audience are probably familiar with is the Kuomintang or the KMT. And today I would say that they are a party that's for pragmatic relations with both Beijing and Washington. And I think it's really funny because Taiwan separatists like to frame them as proxies of the CPC, while many pro-China Westerners talk about them as if the Chinese Civil War is still actively going on and that they are the number one enemy of the CPC. But neither of these views are true. Then the other major party is the Democratic Progressive Party or the DPP. That is the party that's currently incumbent. And the DPP rose out of the liberal opposition movement against the KMT back during the era of martial law. Now, today they're known as a separatist or so-called Taiwan independence leaning party. But if you can believe it, that wasn't always the case. Their original goal was to establish a liberal democracy here in Taiwan, in martial law, have freedom of press, freedom of speech, and all of that stuff. But by the 1990s, I feel like they almost unexpectedly got all of that pretty quickly. And so to differentiate themselves from the KMT, they began adopting Taiwan separatist rhetoric to take advantage of the social contradictions that existed within Taiwan society. So basically from 1949 or the mid 1940s until the late 1980s and I'd say early 1990s, Taiwan was under martial law and democracy beyond the city and county levels was suspended. So you had a so-called National Assembly that was meant to represent all of China, elected in 1948 on the mainland and relocated to Taiwan in 1949. But because democracy was suspended, this National Assembly remained unchanged until 1991, with the exception of new representatives elected to replace the ones that died. So you had a case, deliberate or not, where Taiwan was governed from the 1940s until 1991, mostly by elites from the Chinese mainland who were very out of touch with the people on Taiwan. Because keep in mind, Taiwan became a Japanese colony in 1895 and was only returned to China in 1945. So that's 50 years of separation. And then between 45 and 49, you also had, the 228 incident and the Civil War was going on the mainland. So the new central government did not really have time to reintegrate Taiwan into the rest of this country. And then shortly afterwards, China was split again because of the Chinese Civil War. And it so happened that the modern Chinese identity was developed on the mainland during, I'd say, the early 20th century. Because back during the feudal era of China, people mostly identified with, their families, their clans, their villages, instead of first and foremost with the country. So while the DPP had legitimate grievances against the KMT, what really happened was the democratization was a chance for the local Taiwan elites that felt sidelined from power because of the way history played out to break the KMT's monopoly over power in Taiwan, at the highest political levels and work their way into government. Now, of course, the majority of both the locals of Taiwan as well as people who arrived to Taiwan after 1949 were poor, while the elites were in the minority of both groups. However, the locals of Taiwan, called 本省人, meaning people of this province, so basically people whose families arrived to Taiwan during the Ming and Qing dynasties and made up the majority of the population here. And of course, many of these people have grievances against the government. And so it's easy to take advantage of this situation and say, hey, look, the KMT wasn't always kind to you. It's because they're made up of outsiders that aren't from Taiwan, but we're from Taiwan and we understand you, so vote for us. And that's a huge strategy on how the DPP originally gained support. And Taiwan separatism, which I would say was once a very fringe ideology, became somewhat of a package deal with those politics to differentiate themselves from the KMT. Now, of course, over the past few decades, the DPP has done some, ideological makeovers And starting in the 2010s, it also became the party of what people might call Western leftism. And instead of focusing too much on identity divides within the island between 本省人 and 外省人, because, frankly, the line between these groups is becoming more and more blurred. It's become more of a we are the protectors of Taiwan against China. And notice how they're saying China and not the Chinese mainland. It's this sort of wording that's meant to subconsciously get people to think of the Chinese mainland and Taiwan not as two parts of China, but instead just two separate countries altogether. And so the DPP first gained the so-called presidency in 2000, won again in 2004. Then the KMT took power again in 2008, all the way until 2016, when the DPP once again won the so-called presidency. And this time it won both the so-called presidency as well as the majority of the legislature. However, during the 8 years of the previous leader, Tsai Ing-wen's leadership, there haven't been many policy successes. So a lot of her leadership was about getting people to, excuse my crassness, but to kind of circle jerk over Taiwan pride or whatever. So naturally, support for the DPP dwindled, but Lai Ching-te was still able to win because for two reasons. One is I feel the KMT did not put out a strong candidate. And on top of that, a new third party emerged called the Taiwan People's Party, or the TPP. This party was founded by former Taipei Mayor Ko Wen-je, and he ran as a candidate in the 2024 election. So Lai Ching-te ended up winning with 40% of the vote, while 60% was split between the TPP's Ko Wen-je and the KMT's Hou You-yi. If we count abstentions, then Lai Ching-te actually won with less than 30% of the vote. So he's by no means a popular leader. He went into office already not popular. Now, this is where the drama begins. As for the legislature, there are 113 seats, and the DPP ended up winning 51 seats, while the KMT won 52. There's two independents that are KMT leaning. So let's just say the KMT has 54. The remaining 8 seats went to the TPP. And while 8 seats don't seem like much, because neither 51 nor 54 crossed the 50% threshold, which would be 57, that means the TPP is the tie-breaking vote. So when the KMT and DPP vote in opposite ways, that means the TPP gets to decide. Now, when this new administration, this new Lai Ching-te administration was elected, the TPP was still kind of a wild card, and it sought to remain neutral between the KMT and DPP and prove itself as a viable third party. So it didn't really want to side with either, off the bat. Now, the speaker of the legislature is determined by whichever party's candidate gets the most votes. So we can all assume all 51 of the DPP's legislators will vote for the DPP candidate for speaker, Ko Jae-myung, while all 54 KMT or KMT-aligned legislators will vote for the KMT's candidate, Han Kuo-yu. In this situation, the TPP, if it ran its own candidate and voted for him or her, that would hand victory over to the KMT. So the only way the DPP would be able to win would be if the TPP voted for the DPP's nominee for the Speaker of the Legislature. Now, the TPP decided to run their own candidate symbolically to show that they are independent from either party, and this resulted in the KMT's candidate winning Speaker of the Legislature. So when this happened, the DPP basically just considered the TPP to be a bunch of anti-democratic traitors, and they mobilized a protest. And this is the beginning of what we call the Qingniao movement, or the Bluebird. Now you might wonder why it's called blue, but Qing, the character Qing, in ancient Chinese can mean either blue or green, and in this case it should be green, but in English it's Bluebird. Began the process of pushing the TPP and the KMT closer to one another, and now the TPP has no good reason to be on good terms with the DPP. And with the TPP strategically aligned with the KMT against the DPP nowadays, we can say that the legislature is firmly under the control of the opposition, with the opposition meaning the KMT and TPP. Now, normally in a liberal democracy, when this happens, you kind of suck it up and do your best to work for a better election. And you work with the opposition and compromise with them to make sure that the government still runs, that society isn't, becoming more and more split. And by showing good faith and running stronger candidates in the next election, you might have a better chance at winning next time. But instead of doing this, the DPP under Lai Ching-te's leadership started plotting a mass recall to get rid of every single non-DPP legislator they could. And while they call it democratic, it's actually not, because in order to become a legislator, you had to get the majority of the vote. But to recall one, once you get enough signatures to launch the recall, you only need 25% of the legislator's district to vote in favor of the recall. And the votes in favor of the recall, as long as they're not outnumbered by votes against it, it'll pass. So it's basically an attempt at overturning the popular will with just 25% of the vote. Because let's face it, most people don't vote one way or another in a recall. So long story short, they launched a recall, and it's kind of like if Donald Trump decided to try and launch a mass recall against all Democrats in the House and Senate. Like if you recall like one or two individual government officials that you feel are not fulfilling their duties, that's one thing. But it's not meant the recall is not meant to be a tool to just overturn the vote on such a mass scale. And if needless to say, such an effort can't be done without some sort of central coordination, but they kept on claiming that it was all grassroots. So I guess people got sick of these shenanigans and everyone voted against the recalls. And on July 26th, of the 24 legislators that were up for recall, guess how many actually got recalled? Well, I know you know the answer, but
No, please tell us. Please tell the audience.
absolutely zero. Goose egg. And there was also one TPP mayor, the mayor of Hsinchu, that was up for recall, but she was also not successfully recalled. So by the second time, I mean, at this point, it was like a huge slap in the face for the DPP. So August 23rd, it was everybody already knew the results that even the betting market was not active for the second round on August 23rd because nobody was going to bet that anyone was going to get recalled at that point. So, long story short, it was a failed attempt at a power grab by Lai Ching-te. And rather than him gaining more power, it actually put him in a worse position than ever before.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like he's quite good at that, and thank you so much for like so thoroughly breaking down, the history of the parties and all the drama, because there does seem to be a lot of drama, and there also seems to be a lot of very cunning strategy to undermine and to, like you said, gain power that constantly backfires. I think before